The rescue team found them 3 hours after the jamming signal failed. Following the princess's emergency beacon through the tunnels to the ancient shrine where the battle had taken place. And even the hardened Valorian soldiers stopped in shock when they saw what waited for them. 8 Crethani bodies lay scattered across the chamber. Their weapons dropped and their armor breached. And sitting against the far wall was a human male covered in blood, both his own and that of his enemies. Still clutching a combat knife in his right hand. Still breathing despite wounds that should have killed him many times over Princess. Sareth emerged from the inner chamber and ran to the rescue team. But she did not collapse into their arms with relief as they expected. Instead, pointing at the fallen human and demanding that they save him first. "He protected me," she said with a voice that allowed no argument. "He killed them when they came for me. He fought alone against all of them. You will save him, or I will never forgive any of you." The Valorian medics approached Ji-hoon carefully, their scanners struggling to interpret his alien physiology. And they realized quickly that they had no idea how to treat injuries on a human body that had been pushed so far beyond its limits. Human medical specialists were summoned from the summit security team, arriving within the hour to take over treatment of their fallen colleague. And even they were amazed that he still lived after losing so much blood and suffering so many wounds. For 3 days, Ji-hoon drifted between life and death, while the best doctors that money could buy fought to save him. And during those 3 days, the story of what had happened spread through the palace and then beyond to the wider galaxy. A simple human guard had held a corridor alone against a Crethani assault team, killing 9 enemy soldiers in close combat while suffering wounds that would have killed any Valorian instantly. All to protect a princess who was not even of his species. The Emperor himself came to the medical wing on the 4th day, standing beside the bed where Ji-hoon lay wrapped in bandages and connected to machines that beeped and hummed with quiet efficiency. And he looked upon the face of the human who had saved his daughter. "He does not look like a legend," the Emperor said softly. "Legends rarely do," Princess Sareth replied from her seat beside the bed, where she had stayed for almost every hour since the rescue. "That is what makes them remarkable." The political aftermath of the attack was immense, with the Crethani faction that had planned the assault exposed and condemned by their own government. Their leaders arrested and their assets seized, their names becoming synonymous with shame and failure across Crethani space. But the greater story was not about politics or diplomacy, or the complex relations between species. It was about a man who had done his duty. Ji-hoon woke on the 7th day to find himself in a hospital bed that was far too comfortable for someone like him. And his first words were to ask about the princess. Needing to know that his sacrifice had not been in vain, Sareth was there within minutes, her face bright with relief and joy, and she took his hand in hers and told him that yes, she was safe. He had protected her just as he promised. He had held the line against impossible odds and given her the chance to survive. 2 weeks later, when Ji-hoon could finally stand and walk with assistance, he was brought before the imperial court to receive the gratitude of the Valorian Empire. The throne room was vast and beautiful, filled with nobles and diplomats and representatives from 100 worlds who had come to witness this unprecedented ceremony. And Ji-hoon stood before them in a simple uniform that concealed the bandages still wrapped around his healing wounds. The Emperor rose from his throne and descended the steps to stand before the human guard, looking down at him with an expression that mixed gratitude with something approaching awe. "Kang Ji-hoon of Earth, you have rendered a service to our empire that cannot be repaid with words or wealth. You saved the life of our daughter when all others failed. Ask anything within our power to grant, and it shall be yours." Ji-hoon considered the offer with the same calm practicality that had guided him through the battle. And when he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. "I ask only to return to duty when I have healed. Your Majesty, I am a guard. It is what I am. It is what I will always be." A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. Nobles and diplomats alike, unable to understand why anyone would refuse wealth and power and status for something so simple as a return to work. But Princess Sareth understood. She stepped forward and addressed the court with a mighty voice that carried to every corner of the vast chamber, telling them what she had witnessed in the tunnels beneath the palace, describing the human who had fought without telepathy or advanced technology or any advantage except his will. "The old stories about humans are not exaggerations," she declared. "They are understatements. This man fought alone against an army because I was under his protection, because he had given his word, because humans do not abandon those they have sworn to defend. And I say to all of you that we have made a terrible mistake in underestimating their kind." The emperor listened to his daughter and then turned back to Ji-hoon with a new expression on his face, one of genuine respect. "You asked to return to duty," he said. "Very well, but you will not return as a contractor or a hired guard. From this day forward, you are named Guardian of the Imperial Line, a title held only by Valorian nobles for 10,000 years. The first non-Valorian to ever bear this honor." Ji-hoon accepted the title with a simple bow, showing no pride or satisfaction, treating this incredible honor the same way he treated everything else in his life, as something he had earned through doing his job in the months that followed. The story spread across the galaxy through news feeds and diplomatic channels and whispered conversations in spaceport bars. The tale of the human guard who became a legend, and wherever the story traveled, species who had dismissed humans as primitive deathworlders began to reconsider their assumptions, began to remember the old warnings about the strange creatures from Earth, who loved and fought and died with equal intensity. Ji-hoon returned to duty as soon as his wounds allowed, taking his place as guardian with the same quiet professionalism he had always shown. And if he noticed that other species now looked at him with something approaching fear, he never mentioned it. He was just a guard doing his job, but the galaxy would never forget what he had taught them about humanity, that they were loyal beyond reason, brave beyond measure, and dangerous beyond imagination, and that they should never, ever be underestimated. The ancient shrine appeared before them like a promise of salvation. A large chamber carved from living rock with symbols on the walls that glowed faintly with some power that had outlasted the civilization that created it. And Ji-hoon felt hope for the first time since the attack began, according to the palace blueprints he had studied. This shrine connected to the outer grounds through a passage that would let them escape the palace entirely and reach safety. Beyond the Crethony perimeter, that hope died when he saw the collapse. The far end of the shrine, where the exit passage should have been, was nothing but rubble and broken stone, sealed by some ancient cave-in that had never been repaired because no one had needed this route for thousands of years. Sarah saw his expression and understood immediately. We are trapped. Ji-hoon moved through the shrine anyway, checking every wall and corner for any possible exit, but there was nothing. Only solid stone on all sides, except for the single entrance they had used to enter. He stood in the center of the chamber and assessed his situation with the cold clarity that combat training had given him, counting his remaining ammunition and cataloging his injuries and calculating odds that grew worse with every passing minute. The wound on his ribs had reopened during their last fight, and the blood loss was beginning to affect him even with the strength that Sareth had shared. And he knew that he could not keep fighting indefinitely, even if his ammunition held out. The Crethony were still hunting them, their voices echoing through the tunnels behind. And it was only a matter of time before they found this place. Ji-hoon made a decision. Your Highness, I need you to hide in that inner chamber. He pointed to a small alcove at the back of the shrine where ancient priests had once performed rituals. Get behind the altar and stay there no matter what you hear. Sareth looked at the narrow entrance to the shrine. and then back at him. And he watched understanding dawn on her face. "You are going to stay here and fight them. I am going to hold this entrance as long as I can. The passage is narrow enough that they can only come at me one or two at a time, which gives me an advantage I can use. You will die, probably," Ji-hoon agreed. "But maybe I will buy enough time for the jamming to fail, or for someone to notice that something is wrong. Maybe rescue will come before they finish me. Maybe you will survive this." Sarah stood before him with tears forming in her large, dark eyes. And for a moment she looked not like a princess, but like a young person facing something too terrible to accept. "I cannot let you sacrifice yourself for me. You do not have a choice," Ji-hoon said, and his voice was gentle despite the harshness of his words. "This is my duty, and I will see it through. Now please hide so that my sacrifice has meaning." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something that surprised him completely. Reaching out to touch his face with her delicate fingers and speaking in a voice thick with emotion. "I will not forget what you have done. I will make certain that no one forgets. If I survive this night, I will tell the galaxy about the human who stood alone against an army to protect someone he barely knew." Ji-hoon nodded and watched her retreat to the inner chamber. And then he turned to face the entrance and began preparing his final stand. He positioned himself behind a fallen pillar that would provide some cover, checking his weapon one more time and arranging his remaining ammunition where he could reach it quickly. And then he waited in the blue glow of the ancient symbols with blood dripping slowly from his side. The Crethony arrived in force. A full squad of 12 soldiers with their weapons ready and their leather skin gleaming in the shrine's strange light. And they paused at the entrance when they saw the human waiting for them. Their leader stepped forward and spoke in heavily accented common. "You cannot escape. Human, surrender the princess and we will let you live." Ji-hoon raised his weapon and answered with a shot that took the leader in the throat. And then the battle began. They came at him in waves, limited by the narrow entrance, just as he had predicted. And he made them pay for every step they advanced with blood and death, dropping one soldier after another while they struggled to reach him. He took hits in return, burns on his shoulder and arm, and a deep wound on his leg that made standing difficult. But he refused to fall, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him broken, refused to stop fighting for even one moment. The Crethony could not understand what they were facing, having never encountered anything like this human who absorbed damage that would have killed any Valorian instantly and kept fighting with undiminished fury. And for the first time, they began to feel something that their warrior culture rarely allowed: fear. They had heard stories about humans from older soldiers, tales of deathworlders who fought beyond all reason and survived wounds that should have been fatal. But they had dismissed these stories as exaggeration and propaganda. Now they understood that the stories were true. Ji-hoon killed 8 of them before his ammunition ran dry. And then he drew his combat knife and kept fighting. A blood-soaked demon in human form who would not stop, could not stop, until his body finally failed him. Princess Sareth watched through a gap in the chamber door as the human guard absorbed another hit and staggered but did not fall. And she finally understood what the elder races had meant when they spoke of humanity with fear in their voices. This was what Earth had created. This was what a death world produced. A creature so dedicated to survival and protection that it would burn itself to ash. Before surrendering, the 9th Crethony fell with a knife in his chest. And Ji-hoon fell with him, his body finally surrendering to the accumulated damage of this endless night. Collapsing against the shrine wall with his weapon still clutched in his hand, the 3 surviving Crethony approached him carefully, still afraid of the human even now. And they were raising their weapons to finish him when something changed. The jamming signal died, and emergency lights flooded the tunnels with brilliant red. And alarms began to sound throughout the palace as security systems finally detected the intrusion that had been hidden from them for hours. The Krathimi fled rather than face the response that was surely coming, abandoning their mission and their dead to escape through the tunnels before they could be caught. And Ji-hoon lay against the wall of the ancient shrine, bleeding from a dozen wounds. Barely conscious but still alive, still breathing, still holding his position, even though he could no longer stand. He had held the line. Whatever came next, he had done his duty. The maintenance tunnels beneath the palace were nothing like the elegant halls above. All exposed pipes and rough stone walls and darkness so complete that Ji-hoon had to activate the small light mounted on his weapon just to see where they were going. Princess Sareth followed close behind him, one hand gripping his jacket and the other pressed against the tunnel wall for balance. And he could feel her trembling through the fabric, but she did not complain or ask him to slow down. They had been moving for perhaps 20 minutes when Ji-hoon finally stopped at a junction where 3 tunnels met. And he studied the old directional markers painted on the walls while trying to remember the palace blueprints he had memorized during his preparation for this assignment. "Why did they come for me?" Sareth asked in the darkness, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am the 3rd princess. I have no political importance. I am not even in the line of succession for anything that matters." Ji-hoon checked his weapon and answered without looking at her, "That is exactly why they came for you. Because you are unimportant enough to be lightly guarded, but valuable enough to use as leverage against your father." They knew the summit would draw all the real security to the main halls, leaving you exposed. You were my security. I was one guard, your highness. And they sent a small army. He chose the left tunnel and started moving again, and Sareth followed without question, having apparently decided that wherever Ji-hoon led was better than standing still in the dark. They walked for what felt like hours through the winding passages beneath the palace, occasionally hearing distant sounds that might have been pursuit or might have been nothing. And Ji-hoon kept them moving because movement was life and stopping was death. During a brief rest in a small chamber where several pipes converged, Sareth sat on the cold floor and looked at Ji-hoon with an expression he could not interpret. "You do not have to do this," she said. "Do what, your highness? Protect me like this? Risk your life for someone you barely know. You are a contractor. You could surrender me to them and probably survive. They have no reason to kill a human who gives them what they want." Ji-hoon considered her words, while checking the charge level on his weapon and counting the ammunition he had left, which was not much but would have to be enough. "You are in my care," he said simply. "That is the only thing that matters. But why does that matter to you? You owe me nothing. You owe my family nothing. We have treated you and your kind as little better than useful animals since you arrived." Ji-hoon looked at her then. Really looked at her for perhaps the first time since this all began. And he saw not a princess, but a frightened young person asking a question that deserved an honest answer. "On Earth we have a concept called duty," he said. "It means doing what is right because it is right, not because of what you might gain or lose. When I took this job, I accepted responsibility for your safety. And that responsibility does not disappear because the situation becomes difficult or dangerous. Even though we have been unkind to you, even then," Ji-hoon confirmed. "Loyalty is not something you earn from humans. It is something we give, and once given it is not taken back easily. Your people may not understand this, but it is the truth of what we are." Sareth was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed, becoming somehow smaller and more real than her royal manner had allowed before. "I think perhaps my people have misunderstood humans very badly. Most species do," Ji-hoon agreed. And for just a moment, something like a smile crossed his face. "We are strange creatures." They moved on through the tunnels, deeper into the maze beneath the palace. And Ji-hoon began to worry that they might be hopelessly lost when he heard sounds ahead. The scraping of boots on stone and the harsh Crethany language echoing through the passages. He pushed, Sareth back into a side passage and pressed himself against the wall. Weapon ready, waiting as the sounds grew closer and closer until 3 Krethani scouts appeared at the junction ahead. The fight happened in near darkness. Ji-hoon moving on instinct and training while the Krethani struggled to respond to an attack they never expected. And when it was over, 2 of them lay dead, and the 3rd was unconscious with his skull cracked against the stone wall, but Ji-hoon had paid a price, taking a deep cut across his ribs from a blade he had not seen in time. And the blood was warm against his skin as he pressed his hand against the wound and tried to determine how bad it was. "You are hurt," Sarah said. Moving toward him with concern on her face, "I will manage. We need to keep moving." She reached out and touched his arm, and he felt something strange pass through him. A warmth that seemed to ease the pain slightly and give him a small surge of energy he had not possessed a moment before. What was that? "My people are healers as well as telepaths," she explained. "I cannot repair the damage, but I can help with the pain and give you some of my strength. It is the least I can do." They continued through the tunnels with renewed purpose. And when they encountered another pair of Krethani scouts, Ji-hoon was surprised to find that Sareth did not simply hide behind him. Instead, she reached out with her telepathic ability and touched the mind of one attacker, not reading thoughts but projecting instead, flooding his mind with confusion and pain that made him stagger and drop his weapon. And Ji-hoon used that moment to finish both enemies before they could recover. "You are full of surprises, Your Highness. I have never used my gifts as weapons before," she admitted. "But it seems this night is teaching both of us new things about ourselves." They moved on through the darkness. 2 unlikely allies from different worlds, learning to fight together against enemies who would never understand what they were truly facing. Not a princess and a guard, but something far more dangerous. A partnership forged in desperation and tempered in battle, growing stronger with every passing hour of this terrible night. The attack came in the deep hours of the night cycle when the palace slept, and the guards at their posts fought the weight of their own eyelids. And Ji-hoon was awake because he had not even tried to sleep. Sitting instead in the darkness of his quarters with his boots on and his weapon charged and ready, he heard the first sound at exactly 3 hours past midnight. A soft thump that most people would have dismissed as nothing important. But Ji-hoon had spent years in combat zones where soft thumps often preceded explosions and death. So he moved. The corridor outside his quarters was empty and silent in a way that felt wrong. And Ji-hoon realized that the ambient sounds of the palace had changed. The distant hum of machinery and the chingery and the pogin whisper of climate systems, all slightly off from what he had grown accustomed to during his days here. He pressed himself against the wall and advanced toward the princess's wing with his weapon raised, moving the way he had been trained to move through hostile territory, checking corners and listening for any sound that did not belong. The first body appeared around the 3rd corner. A Valorian guard crumpled against the wall with burn marks on his chest and his large dark eyes staring at nothing. And Ji-hoon felt his training take over completely, pushing aside any emotion that might slow him down. 2 more Valorian guards lay dead in the next corridor, their elegant weapons still holstered because they had never even had time to draw them. And Ji-hoon understood that whoever had done this was fast and professional and very dangerous. He heard voices ahead, harsh and guttural in a language he did not recognize. And he pressed himself into an alcove and waited as 3 figures passed by. Tall and broad, with skin like dark leather and armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Krethani, his mind supplied from the briefings he had studied on the shuttle. A warrior species that had old conflicts with the Valorian Empire over territory and resources and pride. And Ji-hoon knew immediately that this was not a random attack. They were here for something specific. He let them pass and then moved in the opposite direction, heading toward the princess's quarters with growing urgency. Because if the Crethini were ignoring the summit, halls where all the important delegates gathered, then their target must be somewhere else, somewhere like the lightly guarded wing of the Nen. Unimportant Princess Ji-hoon rounded the final corner and found chaos. 4 Crethini soldiers stood in the corridor outside Sarath's chambers, one of them working on the sealed door while the others kept watch. And scattered around them were the bodies of the Valorian guards who had tried to stop them and failed. The Crethini spotted Ji-hoon at the same moment he spotted them, and for a fraction of a second, everyone froze. The aliens, clearly surprised to find resistance where they expected none, Ji-hoon shot the first one before they could react. A clean hit to the chest that dropped the soldier instantly, and then he was moving, using the corridor's limited space to prevent them from flanking him while he engaged the remaining 3. The Crethini were good fighters, strong and fast and well-trained, but they had prepared to fight Valorians, a species known for mental powers rather than physical combat. And they had not expected to face something like Ji-hoon, a human from a death world, raised in an environment that bred killers. Trained by a military that had perfected the art of violence over thousands of years of constant warfare, the fight was brutal and quick, lasting perhaps 30 seconds that felt like 30 hours. And when it ended, Ji-hoon stood over 3 more bodies with blood running from a gash on his forehead and his breathing coming hard and fast. He moved to the sealed door and activated the emergency intercom. "Your Highness, this is Ji-hoon. Please open the door. We need to move now." A moment of silence stretched into eternity before the door slid open and Sarath appeared, her large eyes wide with terror and her pale blue skin even paler than normal. And she looked at the bodies in the corridor and then at Ji-hoon with an expression he could not read. "What is happening?" She whispered. "Crethini infiltrators," Ji-hoon said, already scanning the corridor for more threats. "They killed your guards and they are here for you. We cannot stay here, but the palace security will respond. They will send reinforcements." Ji-hoon shook his head and pointed to the communication panel on the wall, which showed nothing but static where there should have been connection indicators. "They are jamming all signals. No one knows what is happening here. And by the time someone realizes something is wrong, it will be too late." He took her hand without asking permission and started moving down the corridor, stepping over the bodies of the fallen guards and heading away from the direction the Crethini patrol had gone. "Where are we going?" Sarath asked, struggling to keep up with his pace. "Anywhere but here," Ji-hoon answered. He led her through a series of turns until they reached a maintenance junction that he had noted during his patrols, a place where the elegant architecture of the palace gave way to the practical systems that kept everything running. And he forced open an access panel to reveal a dark passage beyond. "I cannot go in there," Sarath said, her voice rising with fear. "It is dark and small, and I do not know what is inside." Ji-hoon turned to face her and spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had already accepted whatever was coming. "Your Highness, behind us are soldiers who want to take you hostage or kill you. I do not know which. It does not matter. In front of us is a dark tunnel that might lead to safety. Those are your only choices right now." He watched her struggle with her fear. This princess who had never known violence or danger or any of the harsh realities that Ji-hoon had lived with his entire life. And he saw the moment when she made her decision. "I will follow you," she said. Ji-hoon nodded and climbed into the darkness. And after a moment of hesitation, she followed him, leaving behind the only world she had ever known and placing her trust in a simple human guard who had no plan beyond keeping her alive for one more minute, and then one more minute after that. Behind them, the sounds of more Crethini soldiers echoed through the corridors, hunting for the princess who had somehow escaped their trap. The long night had only just begun. Kang Ji-hoon stepped off the transport shuttle and took his first breath of Valorian air, finding it thin and sweet like breathing through flowers. And he knew immediately that this world had never known war or hardship or any of the things that shaped a planet like Earth. The Imperial Palace rose before him like a dream, made solid, all flowing curves and crystal spires that caught the lavender sunlight and scattered it into rainbows across the landing platform. And Ji-hoon thought it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and also the most fragile. He was 32 years old with 10 years of military service behind him and another 3 years working private security contracts across the galaxy. And in all that time, he had learned one truth that never failed him, which was that beautiful things attracted those who wished to break them. The other human guards gathered their equipment and formed up for inspection. 12 of them in total brought here by the Sentinel Protection Group to supplement palace security during some diplomatic summit that Ji-hoon did not fully understand, and did not need to understand. His job was simple. Stand where they told him to stand, watch what they told him to watch, and react if anything went wrong. A Valorian official glided toward them across the platform, and Ji-hoon studied the alien with quiet interest, noting the tall, slender frame wrapped in silk robes, the pale blue skin that seemed almost translucent, the large, dark eyes that held an expression Ji-hoon recognized from 100 different species on 100 different worlds. It was the look of someone examining insects. "Welcome to Valoria Prime," the official said in flawless common, though his tone suggested the welcome was merely procedural. "You will be assigned to your posts within the hour and briefed on palace protocols. And I trust you understand that any deviation from these protocols will result in immediate termination of your contract." The human team leader, a woman named Santos, responded with professional courtesy, while Ji-hoon let his eyes wander across the palace grounds, counting guard positions and noting sightlines and measuring distances between structures. Doing all of this automatically because his brain had been trained to see threats everywhere, even in paradise, especially in paradise. The briefing took place in a room that made Ji-hoon feel like a stain on clean fabric. All white walls and floating furniture and soft music that seemed to come from nowhere. And the Valorian security commander explained their assignments with barely concealed disdain. Most of the human team would rotate through the summit halls where the important delegates gathered, serving as visible deterrence and emergency response units. But someone needed to cover the less critical areas of the palace during the event. Ji-hoon was assigned to the residential wing of the third princess. He understood what this meant without anyone explaining it, which was that he had drawn the least important post available, guarding someone who did not matter to anyone who mattered. And he accepted the assignment with a fang with it. Simple nod, because he had learned long ago that ego was a luxury he could not afford. The princess's wing occupied a quiet corner of the Teos palace far from the grand halls and diplomatic chambers, and Ji-hoon took his position outside her private quarters and began the familiar routine of watching and waiting that filled most of his professional life. He had been standing there for perhaps 2 hours when the door opened and she appeared. Princess Sereth was young by her species standards, which meant she was probably older than Ji-hoon's grandmother, but she moved with the uncertain energy of someone still finding their place in the world, and her large dark eyes fixed on him with obvious curiosity. "You are the human guard," she said, and it was not a question. "Yes, Your Highness." She tilted her head in a way that reminded Ji-hoon of a bird examining something new and potentially interesting. And she stepped closer to study him with an intensity that might have made another man uncomfortable. "Your mind is very quiet," she said. "I cannot hear anything from you at all, not even the surface thoughts that most species broadcast constantly. And I find this strange and somewhat unsettling. Ji-hoon had read about Valorian telepathy during the shuttle ride to this world, learning that they could sense emotions and surface thoughts from most species, but the humans were largely resistant to this ability. Something about the structure of human neural pathways that made them difficult to read. I apologize if this causes discomfort. Your Highness, do not apologize, she said with something that might have been a smile. It is actually refreshing to meet someone whose thoughts are not constantly pressing against my awareness. And I think perhaps we might have interesting conversations. If you are willing to speak with me. Ji-hoon considered the protocols he had been given, which said nothing about conversation with the person he was protecting, and he decided that refusing to speak with a princess was probably more of a violation than engaging in polite talk. I am willing. Your Highness, though I should remain alert to my duties. Over the following days a pattern emerged between them, with Sereth appearing at her door several times each day to ask Ji-hoon questions about Earth and humanity and his life before coming to her world. And he answered as honestly as he could, while maintaining his watchful stance. She seemed fascinated by the concept of a death world, which was what the galactic community called planets like Earth, where the environment itself was hostile to life. And she could not understand how any species could evolve on a world that was constantly trying to kill them. It made us strong, Ji-hoon explained during one of their talks. Every generation that survived passed on whatever helped them survive. And after millions of years, we became very good at not dying. But surely this made your species aggressive and dangerous, Sereth said. Some of us. Yes, Ji-hoon admitted, but it also made us loyal and protective. Because surviving a death world requires cooperation and sacrifice and caring for those who cannot protect themselves. On the fourth night of his assignment, Ji-hoon noticed something wrong during his patrol of the wing. Specifically, a servant whose movements seemed rehearsed rather than natural, and a security door that had been left unsealed when it should have been locked. He reported these observations through the proper channels and received a response that was polite but dismissive, essentially telling him that Valorian security had protected this palace for 10,000 years and did not need advice from a human contractor. Ji-hoon accepted this response and returned to his post. But he did not sleep that night, instead sitting in the darkness of his small quarters with his weapon within reach and his instincts screaming that something terrible was coming. He had learned to trust those instincts, because they had kept him alive through situations that should have killed him many times over. And he knew that the galaxy was full of people who ignored warnings until the warnings became tragedies. Whatever was coming would find him ready.